25 years and my life is still trying to get up that great big hill of hope for a destination. I realized quickly when I knew I should that the world was made up of this brotherhood of man, for whatever that means. And I tried. Oh my God, do I try? I try all the time in this institution, and I pray. Oh my God, do I pray? I pray every single day for revolution into a closer times when I'm lying in bed just to get it all out what's in my head. And I'm feeling a little peculiar into a week in the morning, and I step outside and I take a deep breath and I get real high and I scream from the top of my lungs, what's going on? And I say, hey, yeah, yeah, hey, yeah, yeah. I said, hey, oh, what's going on? And I said, what's going on? And I said, ooh, ooh, ooh. 25 years and my life is still trying to get up that great big hill of hope for a destination. I realized quickly when I knew I should that the world was made up of this brotherhood of man, for whatever that means. And I tried. Oh my God, do I try? I try all the time in this institution, and I pray. Oh my God, do I pray? I pray every single day for revolution into a closer times when I'm lying in bed just to get it all out what's in my head. And I'm feeling a little peculiar into a week in the morning, and I step outside and I take a deep breath and I get real high and I scream from the top of my lungs, what's going on? And I say, hey, yeah, yeah, hey, yeah, yeah. I said, hey, oh, what's going on? And I said, hey, yeah, yeah, hey, yeah, yeah.
Well, welcome to the very first edition of Canada, a user's manual and a user's guide and owner's manual. So thank you very much for joining with me. As many of you know, I have been a advocate and opposing government for 25 years. The last 15 years as an elected representative in the Ontario legislature, and the very first elected representative in Canada to speak out against the madness of the COVID mandates and the state of emergency. And this program is motivated from that understanding over those 25 years that there's really three segments of society that I see in the voting population. There's a group of people that are too busy with their lives, too uninterested, and maybe even a little bit lazy to get too involved in politics. Well, this show is not for them. There's another group of people who are maybe a little apathetic, complacent. They don't believe participation can fix anything, and they just more or less complain about this machine we call government. And this program isn't for those either. However, there is a large number of people in our country, and I think in the Western world, who want to be involved, want to be engaged, but lack either the vocabulary or the knowledge about how to make democracy and government work for them. And that's who this program is made for. People who want to be engaged, people who want to be involved, people who want to learn how the system and this machine we call government actually works and give them a better understanding. So thanks for joining me tonight. And we will, this episode is about efficient government. So stay tuned as we dispel some of the myths of efficient government. Welcome to Canada, a user's guide and owner's manual. Many people want to fix this broken down machine called government. So join with me every week as we create an owner's manual to help people understand what these parts are, how they're supposed to fit together, and how to troubleshoot, maintain, and fix this broken down machine. In this week's episode of Canada, an owner's manual and user's guide, we're going to talk about some of the misconceptions about government and that have come to light recently. We saw Elon Musk talking about wanting to have an efficient government and becoming a czar of efficiency. Well, I'm going to say to you, the last thing that freedom-minded people want is an efficient government. And let me just give you an explanation for this, a short explanation. Governments create laws, new laws for people, and all laws restrict or limit our freedoms. We don't want governments acting quickly or rash in the development of new laws. We want them to be slow, methodical, deliberate when new laws are created. To give you a contrast, one of the most efficient governments we have ever seen was the USSR. The Soviet Union was exceptionally efficient. They could create a law today, enact it tomorrow, implement it the next day, and there it was. A new law to restrict your freedom without any public discussion, without any public debate, of course. It was a communist country. But they could arrest you the day the law was made, and they were so efficient, they'd also have you in front of the judge that very same day and have you off to the gulag the same day, all in one day. That's not the sort of efficiency that we want to have in a representative democracy. Slow, methodical, deliberate. And people confuse the difference between the administration of government and the creation of laws in government. Stay tuned. I hope you enjoy this lesson. Well, thank you. Tonight we have Lee Stewie joining with me in this first episode. Lee Stewie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Randy. I'm so excited about your new series. I think it's very imperative for Canadians to understand the inner workings of government and all the inner workings of like we're going to discuss tonight, of how a bill is passed and what goes into that. But before we get into it, I'm going to just do a little bit of housekeeping. So I'm first off going to mention your two events that are coming up in Wallaceburg on October 23rd, and then Sarnia October 24th. And I think there should be some links in the YouTube chat where people can purchase tickets. I think it's $20 for your town hall events. And I encourage everyone to go to those. They're very informative. I went to the one in Niagara Falls and had a great time and enjoyed a lot of the information sharing that went on there. And then, so the way the stream is going to work is the last portion of the stream is going to be Randy answering your questions. So there were questions submitted by you guys in the chat to Randy's website, which is randyhillier.com/ask-a-question. But if you didn't get a chance to submit a question before the stream, we're going to be addressing super chats as well towards the end portion of the stream. So I think with that being said, we can just jump right into it. And we got a lot to go over here, Randy. I'm very excited to learn how things work in the House of Commons and in the Ontario legislature. So first off, what I'm going to ask you.
Hold on. Listen,
okay.
We should also, just for people, Lee Stewie has been a strong and passionate advocate for freedom. And long before COVID, she knew that there was something not quite right with this machine we call government. So
yeah, I'm not very good at talking about myself. But yes, long time exposer of government. And most recently, I've been mostly focusing on the immigration issue that's going on in Canada right now, which I think is very important. So
I think we'll leave that for a specific subject. I think that one would be a good one to address as well.
For sure. Okay, so you've raised a point of view that's counterintuitive to what most people might disagree with, or freedom-minded people shouldn't want efficient government. Why is that?
Well, there's really two things I think to describe this. One, I'll do it by way of an adage, the other by way of an analogy. But let's start off first with the absolute priority of government is the creation of law and the imposition of taxes. Those are the two elements of it. And that's done, and we can see that in our Constitution. It says the purpose of government is to create peace, order, and good government. And they do that by the way of law and taxation. And as I said earlier, laws invariably must limit freedom. So if we take a look at that adage that we all know of, we've all heard, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when we were transitioning away from dictators, despots, and monarchs into a representative democracy, the framers of our democracy understood this corrupting powers of the corruption of power. So they built into the system specific checks and balances to limit that. And those checks and balances are cumbersome, they're slow, and they create inefficiency. And this was their way, one of their ways of limiting this corrupting power. And we know that that's one of the reasons why we have 3 readings on a bill. Many people know we have 3 readings, but why 3? Why not just 1? 1 would be far more efficient. And why do we have committee hearings in between readings of bills? Certainly, it would be more efficient if we didn't have committee hearings. So this is, and the framers also went a little further. And instead of just having one legislative body, like the House of Commons, they created 2, the Senate as well. And for the people listening in from the United States, that would be the House of Representatives and their Senate. So they built in all these layers to slow down how government operates. And and I think the other one I would use as an analogy, a lot of people don't understand that our parliaments or the Congress in the US are actual courts. They function very much like our civil courts. The difference being that whereas a civil court is seeking to remedy a dispute between 2 private individuals or 2 companies or whatever, our parliaments and our legislatures are designed to resolve the disputes within society, collective disputes, to moderate, to compromise, to collaborate, so that different communities within our society can find common ground and not be at loggerheads. So that is, and just like our civil courts have due process, they've built in due process to slow down and be methodical and take time to deliberate over the matters at hand. In our civil courts, we have things like mandatory disclosure, we have jury trials, all things that slow the system down, but are all meant to give the individual at least somewhat of a level playing field, fighting the state and preventing the state from being an arbiter, an authoritarian arbiter in it. So we have those due processes in our parliaments, just like our ordinary courts. So the inefficiency is there for a reason, and it's there as a reason to protect the individual from the abuse of power of our government.
So how does who or how does an MP get chosen to present a bill?
Well, so there's 2 forms of bills mostly. There are what's called private members' bills, and those are bills that any elected representative can present to the legislature or the parliament, but they generally don't go anywhere, and they really don't have much bearing at the end of the day. There's value in them, but what most people are going to be more concerned about are government bills, because those are the ones that the government will pass. In my time in the Ontario legislature, there was probably about 150 to 200 bills, private members' bills, introduced every year. But at last count, when I was there, less than 4% of those bills ever became law. And they were mostly what we would call proclamation bills, where somebody may proclaim November as Franco-Ontarian month, or February 26th could be Sir Isaac Brock Day. They really have no bearing, or not much bearing. So, but government bills, those are where the meat and potatoes. These are the bills that are going to cost individuals money, if they're budget bills or financial supply bills, or if they're other bills that will restrict or limit your freedom, or in the alternative is also to remove personal responsibility. Those are and who the minister, they will always have a bill generally introduced by the minister. So if it's for example, the budget bill, that's a simple one that will be introduced by the finance minister. And government bills are only ever introduced by the minister. If they're not by the minister, then it's a private member's bill and unlikely to succeed.
Okay, so after an MP presents the bill, it goes to the first reading, and that's them presenting the bill. And then so after
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so after the bill is presented, that's considered first reading, right? So is the second reading comes after the first reading, and that's when the debate of the actual bill happens. And I noticed during the second reading of Bill C-63, which is the anti-free speech bill, only 10 or 15 MPs out of the 338 were present, who are all eventually going to have to vote on this bill that they haven't even heard debated. So who is selected, and what is that process?
So that's an interesting part of that, and most people aren't aware of this. In the Federal House of Commons, you have 338 members in, what is it, we got 4 or 5 parties? Anyway, split up with whatever number of parties. And there's 5 sitting days in the House of Commons. So, for example, if a party has 100 elected members in their caucus and there's 5 sitting days, they will select 20 members to be on Monday, a different 20 to be in the House on Tuesdays, and so on through the course of the week. And that leaves the other members who don't have a duty day to meet with constituents, or maybe meet with lobbyists, or engage in other activities, including a number of them will also be members of committee, and committees sit during the daytime as well. So and the government whip or the House leader for the party will determine who gets to speak. If there's 20 members in the House, the government House leader or whip will decide which one of those individuals are actually going to speak. You can raise up your hand and say, I want to, but that doesn't mean you're going to. And there's a bit of a corrupting process that has happened as well, Lee, is initially before the parties had gained so much authority and so much discipline, it was up to the speaker to decide who would be recognized and who would speak. But that's long been passe now. And, if you go back and look at Parliament of 50 or 100 years ago, you would have seen multiple members standing up to speak to a bill at a given time. Now you'll only ever see one member stand up, the person selected by the whip or the House leader. So very, very few people get to actually speak to a bill. But again, that defeats the slow, methodical, and also the essential part of representative democracy is we have 338 members there. Each one is supposed to have equal opportunity and equal privilege and equal right to represent their constituents' concern on every piece of legislation. but they have essentially abdicated that role and have allowed the parties to determine who will speak to a bill. So many ridings don't get the representation, and most of the representatives don't get to discharge their duties under the current system.
So you brought up the House Leader and the Whip that decide who out of the 10 and 15 is going to actually present debate on a bill. Could they possibly be swayed by the presenting party to choose who gets to debate the bill?
Yeah, oftentimes that's if an individual member really has a passion on that subject, whatever the subject could be. Natural health products is one of the bills that was in front of the House. The pandemic preparedness treaty is another bill, and members could advocate and impress upon the House leaders or the Whip that they get a speaking opportunity. But it's ultimately it will be the House Leader or the Whip who decides if they're going to speak or not. But yeah, it's sort of like, here is the bone. This piece of legislation is the bone, and you 338 are the dogs, and who wants to chew on this bone? And I'm going to decide who gets to.
Okay, so after the second reading, it goes to the committee, and so who is selected to be on the committee, and who chooses them?
So depending on the committee work, each individual member can advocate for a particular committee. In the Ontario legislature, there was 9 standing committees of the House. And for example, a couple of the ones that I spent a lot of time on that I pushed to be on was the Public Accounts Committee, the Estimates Committee, and also the Committee on the Legislative Assembly. And we might get into some what they actually do, but those were the areas of interest that I found important. I did sit on a few others, but again, it's each individual member can make a passionate plea to be on a committee, but most don't. Most are very willing to just be assigned a committee at the choosing of the party insiders and the Whip and the House Leader. There was another one example. I really pushed for the to be a member of the standing committee on private bills and regulations, because I really wanted to try to reform that system of not having so many excessive regulations coming into Ontario. But Doug Ford, some of the ministers didn't like my approach, and they kicked me off that committee after a few months because they thought I was intruding into the ministers' area of concern. But anyway, so at the committee, that's where everybody in Canada is permitted to make a representation to that committee. And that's what its purpose for, is to hear from individuals how this proposed legislation may impact that person, that family, that business. What are the consequences of the proposed bill? And also, what are the benefits? That's what its design is for. And everybody and anybody is permitted to request standing at the committee. But we've got efficient here as well. Most governments will use mechanisms called time allocation or closure to limit how long the committee will sit and hear, and how many people will be permitted to speak at the committee as well. So the governments are always in a rush to get the bill passed, and then go on to the next lobbyist and the next donor to keep the gravy train running. But it doesn't serve anybody's interest when we pass bills quickly and expediently without taking the time to really consider how they're going to have impact on society and on individuals.
Right. Okay. So where does the bill go after it is passed by the committee?
So after the committee does its deliberations, it is charged with making amendments to the bill, from hearing from what the public has to say and what the experts and the professionals and whoever else has made a representation to the committee. The committee is supposed to offer up amendments and alterations to the bill, and then the committee votes on those proposed amendments. Once, now again, that in my 15 years in the legislature, Lee, I believe there was on 2 occasions I saw the government adopt the opposition's amendments to a bill. And I would say, and if you think of it, each bill will have potentially thousands of clauses, or at a minimum hundreds. And in each year of the legislature, there would be potentially 50, 75 bills passed. So you're talking about many thousands of clauses that were discussed by committee. But in 15 years, I saw 2 amendments by the opposition that were passed by the majority government. So, again, it's the rush. Forget the opposition, forget what people are saying to you. Let's just get the bill passed. Anyway, the amended bill then gets referred back to the House for third reading debate, where once again, every member is entitled to speak to it and debate it and the design is to convince the other side what their views are. But typically at third reading, we see, again, time allocation and closure motions introduced to limit how many people can speak, how many people can debate the particular bill. And then it goes for the vote. If the vote is positive, in our legislatures, then it's referred to the lieutenant governor and to receive royal assent or to be proclaimed into law. It's a slightly bit different in the federal House. There is that other layer of also going to the Senate and having the Senate debate the bills, and then the Senate committees proposing amendments and referring the amended bill back to the House of Commons for final ratification before it goes to the Governor General for royal assent.
Okay, so are MPs trained to know what the government process is once for a bill, like for passing a bill once they get elected?
No, there's very, very minimal training or education for members when they're elected into office. And I think there's benefit for the political parties not to have intelligent, knowledgeable, educated members in caucus. Like that's a bit of a disadvantage for a political party. So there's very little training that goes on other than, do as you're told, is the number one rule in party politics. And, it's like it's very the procedures of the parliament or the procedures of the legislatures are very significant. They're called the standing orders of the House, and I think the standing orders of the House in Ontario would be probably in about 400 pages in length, and I spend a lot of time reading them because this is like the rule book. If we were thinking of politics as a sports game, as a game of hockey or a game of football, this is the rule book on how you actually play the game. What is a red line for? What is a blue line for? What can you get penalties for? And that tripping isn't allowed or cross-checking isn't allowed. We all know that you wouldn't play a game of hockey unless you knew what the rules were. But all of our elected representatives, or I would say probably 99% of our elected representatives, have no idea what the rules are of the game that they're playing.
I think you have a little story about a financier who was approached to become the finance minister, I believe.
Well, very much. This was an interesting story. After Doug Ford and the Conservatives, we got elected in 2018. I was down in the cafeteria but just a few months after the election. And in the cafeteria lineup beside me was the new minister of the Treasury Board. So the Treasury Board is, the ministry that has its hands on the purse strings, how money is going to be allocated to different ministries and what it's going to be spent on. And, so this is an important position. The Ontario budget is about $200 billion. So it's no small potatoes. And the minister of the Treasury Board at the time was a fellow named Peter Bethenfalvey. And he had recently been elected. He was a well-known financier and a captain of Bay Street in the financial markets. And he was in the cafeteria lineup with me. And one of his colleagues from the private sector came up to him and he said, "Peter, what do you think of being the minister of the Treasury Board?" And, and I thought, you could obviously tell that these people had known each other for a long time. And I have to try to show this as well as explain it. Well, Peter says, "This is great." He said, "I'm told when to stand up. I'm told when to sit down. I'm told when to applaud and who to applaud for. And that's what," and he thought this was great. Now, I was astonishedly like here is somebody that came from the private sector, somebody who was a well-known and, like I said, captain of industry, and he was quite happy to be, a trained seal or a puppet or a parrot, and I, needless to say, I was a little bit disappointed, but that's more likely. That's more common than you would like to believe in politics, that the members are happy just to be told what to do.
Right. No thinking, no thought process. And for the amount of money that they're making, you'd think that they'd have to have some sort of from what you've described so far, it's like, you only have to come to, X amount of, debates or sitting in the House, other than question period. It just seems kind of just a lot of paper pushing and not much going on.
Well,
aligning with the party, right? Whatever the party tells you.
There's a lot of theatrics involved. Most members are very eager to get a question because, again, the questions are allotted by the party. And again, unlike 50 or 100 years ago, where anybody and everybody could stand up, and it was up to the speaker to decide who was going to ask a question. Now it's the party house leader and whips who decide who get to ask the question. And of course, this is, the cameras are all on question period. This is the great, the 1 hour of theater for the population to believe that they have a democracy that's functioning for them on display. So everybody wants to have an opportunity to get in front of the cameras for that. But again, it's very much staged, and even you would have to request to the party that you could ask a question. The party may not want you to ask that question, and they may say to you, that's not consistent with the party's messaging. So no, you're not going to get a question. And we saw that. I was talking to Drew Barnes, former MLA from in Alberta this summer at the camp, and he was telling that there was one fella that he was in the legislature in Alberta, and he was there for 11 years, and he had one singular topic that he wanted to push in the Alberta legislature, and I forget what the topic is right offhand. But Drew was saying to me, well, he got to ask one question in 11 years on that subject. So
It's unbelievable.
it really is. It has been co-opted substantially, without question.
Right. Like, I have a quick story actually about an MP that I had an interaction with, Dean Allison. He's the MP for the Niagara area, and he had met with Christine Anderson. And, the Conservative Party had disavowed this meeting, and I had called him up on my own and said, like, what do you think of Christine Anderson? Did you like her? And he had nothing but good things to say about her. And then the Conservative Party put out a statement saying, we disavow, like, once it kind of blew up on Twitter and in the media, the Conservative Party was kind of forced to be like, no, we disavow this sort of thing. We don't like Christine Anderson. And Dean Allison had actually called me back on the phone and said, can you take down the post that you made saying that I don't like, or that I liked meeting with Christine Anderson, because my party, I have to align with the party, not necessarily like what other people think. I have to align with, I'm like, that's contradictory to what you just said, what you told me, that Christine Anderson's a great person. And now your party is coming out saying that they disavow it. And so now you're now aligning with the party. So that was very eye-opening to me, that it wasn't just, he doesn't have a mind of his own. He's kind of just, towing the party line, as they say.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that members have allowed themselves to be diminished and belittled to the degree that they have. I've told many people this, during COVID, there was a great many people, both in the Federal House of Commons and in the Ontario legislature, who shared my views and my sentiments on the mandates, the state of emergency, the how things were exaggerated, the fears were exaggerated. But they all knew that, or most, very few, well, in the beginning, none of them would speak out at all, because they knew what the party wanted them to say. So, in the case that you just showed with Dean Allison, well, he didn't know that the party, that Christine Anderson was persona non grata when he met with her. It only came out later that, but I'll show you another example of that is, in my career, I was approached by Campaign Life in Ontario, and they wanted to have a press conference at Queen's Park. And Yeah, the only people that can have a press conference, they must be sponsored by an MPP. Now, I knew that my party was not interested in hearing anything about pro-life, and they certainly were not interested in hearing anything about campaign life. So I spoke with Rick Nichols, another colleague, and John O'Toole at the time, Aaron O'Toole's father, um, and who I knew that they were of a similar view of mine uh, on pro-life. And I said, we're going to get in shit for sponsoring campaign life, but if the three of us do it together, then it'll be harder and more difficult for the party to be upset with us or to take action against us. So John O'Toole agreed. Rick Nichols agreed, and we had Campaign Life do a press conference. I think it was the last time they had a press conference at Queen's Park, around 2012 or so. Well, if that didn't turn into a shit show in caucus, the party leadership went crazy. They had difficulty in being able to demand penance from us in atonement because they weren't going to kick out three members over this. But I'll say John O'Toole certainly groveled back and said his sorry, your worshipful master, I won't do this again. So he could get back in the good books of the party. But that was a long-standing problem with me in party politics. It was I was always doing things that the party didn't really agree with, and so I spent a lot of time in the penalty box years. But if members want to have a functional democracy, if they actually want to make a difference, they're going to have to start peeling back some of that authorities that they've given to the party, and maybe take a few bruises along the way, so we can get back to an inefficient government. And speaking about inefficiency, so let's we should finish this off. There is no better example of why freedom-minded people don't want an efficient government than COVID. If people will remember, the legislatures and the parliaments were often closed during COVID. And in Ontario, we only got to sit one day in every 30 days during the beginning of COVID. And each day and each week, Doug Ford would come out and pronounce a new law during COVID. And people were on the edge of their seat every day wondering what new law was Doug Ford going to come out with? How many people were we going to be allowed to visit with today? What stores were going to be allowed to function today? Which stores were going to be allowed to be open tomorrow? It was just an incredibly uncertain time because government was making laws every day without any discussion or debate. Bad situation. And we need to make sure that we never do that again for certain. And we also saw it in Ottawa with how quickly Trudeau brought in the Emergency Management Act, how quickly he decided that he could seize bank accounts and property. So that's, I think if people want to use a better word rather than efficient government, we want to limit and constrain and reduce the size and scope of government. But we still want it to be, we don't want it to be fast and efficient.
I think another good example of that would be after the UK riots, when people were rioting about the migrant hotels, they had set up a 24-hour court system where the people who had been charged were handed a sentence within 24 hours and they were thrown in jail. So I think that's another, that's another example of an efficient government that's quite dangerous. So I just want to, we're just reaching about halfway through, and I just want to remind people to send in a super chat if you have a question for Randy that we will be reading at the end of the stream. And don't forget to hit the like button and share this out to everyone. So your friends and family, if maybe they don't know how government works or they're just starting to get involved in politics, that, you might think that they would find this helpful. So getting back to the bills, how do MPs vote on a specific bill? Do they align, or are they influenced by citizens, by lobbyist groups, or their party?
Well,
or all of the above?
So, the term that the way I described it when I was in office is a member. If as far as I was concerned, the member's allegiance is first to their own conscience. Second, the allegiance and loyalty would be to your constituents, and then thirdly to the party. But unfortunately, it's the allegiances to the party, and members know that if they do not vote along if they do not vote along party lines, there is usually some penance, some penalty that you will pay if you don't vote with the party. It's a little bit different on some bills. Some bills would be declared open, but they were very, very few. I voted against my party on a number of occasions. Again, putting me back in the penalty box occasionally. But but that's what I think that is the proper loyalty and the proper methodology to determining how you vote on a bill. Your own conscience. Do not betray yourself. Second, you take into consideration how your constituents feel about it and how they've expressed themselves to you, and how if it's going to be a net positive or negative to them, and then it should be party last. The only the initial in the early days of the design of the system, it was government members were only ever expected to vote in favor or with their party during supply bills, during budgets, and that is because budgets are non-confidence or are confidence motions. So if the members of the governing party didn't vote in favor of the budget, then the government could fall. But historically, it was an open vote on all other bills other than the budget. That has completely altered with the consolidation of authority, the consolidation of power and discipline within the leader's office.
So I think also too, a good example of how MPs may be swayed by lobbyist groups. We saw this with Melissa Lantsman during COVID. Her lobbyist group is for the long-term care facilities and also Walmart. So, we saw Walmart staying open during COVID. And I think you actually have a story, and I don't know if you've ever told this publicly, about you being approached.
Yeah,
about a bill.
Yeah, this was fairly early on in my career. I was the critic for labor at the time, and I was approached by a lobbyist whose client was an industry group, and I'll say this industry group was administrative clerks. I'm not going to name names. I've got enough legal problems at the moment. I don't need defamation suits or whatnot. But this lobbyist came into my office. I was a critic for labor at the time. This was a labor-oriented bill or proposed bill that they wanted me to champion, take it to caucus, get the party to accept and adopt this proposal, and that there would be a regulatory college, sort of like the College of Physicians and Surgeons, but it would be for the College of Administrative Clerks, who then all these clerks would have to be pay dues and become a member and be subject to penalties in the regulatory functions of the college. I told them that they were out to lunch, and there's no way that I would ever advance a bill like that. And they left in a bit of a huff and a puff. Later that day, I got a call from the leader's office. And this is some of the manipulation in politics that people seldom see, but I got to see it that day. The leader's office called me and told me, Randy, that group was going to give the party $50,000 in donations if we brought that bill forward into the House and presented it. And now you've been a bad boy again. Yeah, you didn't do what we thought you were going to do, and you didn't do what our corporate friends want us to do, and it's costing us $50,000. And just for the audience to understand, it is against the law for anybody to give a member money to advance legislation. And certainly we want that law to be on the books. You should never, no member should ever receive money for voting a certain way or for introducing legislation. So the party gets around this by having these lobbyists funnel the money to the party. Okay. And a lot of members would never know how much money the party is getting for them to introduce a bill. The end of that story is an interesting one because after I told them to take a leap, a couple of weeks later, my colleague Christine Elliott, who was the wife of the former finance minister at the time, Jim Flaherty, she was in caucus with me, and she would go on to become the Minister of Health during COVID. But she introduced that bill a couple of weeks later. So I have no doubt that the party did get their money. I have no idea if there was a side deal with Christine that her riding association or there may be some donations there. But she was she introduced a bill that I would not, and everybody was happy once again.
So is it possible that MPs that give in to these lobbyist groups that are pressuring them to pass a bill that's in their favor, would an MP be rewarded by the party with a promotion or a position or of power, a position or promise of power within the party?
Yes, you are certainly rewarded if you can bring in more donors to the party, more industry groups and more donors. And this is often the play that's done is, let's say I'm labor critic and I say to, the Union of Woodpeckers and Sparkies, I will introduce a piece of legislation for you that will improve your exclusivity in the marketplace. And could you help out the party in the meantime by maybe contributing handsomely. And most of these unions and industry groups would say, listen, we'll be happy to give the party lots of money if you're going to advance a piece of legislation that will benefit us. And if the more industry players and the more donations a member can bring into the party, then the higher up the food chain you're going to go, without question.
So it all leads back to money.
It's all about money.
So is it possible that MPs don't read the bills that they're voting on? For instance, like the Holocaust denialism bill that was snuck in through with the budget bill, or the health bill, the natural health bill that was also snuck through a budget bill?
Nobody. There's no benefit for as a party member, as a good party soldier. I heard Corey tonight the other day. He's former chief of staff, director of comms for Stephen Harper, and he's now the singular most important influencer in the Ford administration. He owns a lobby group called Rubicon Strategies. He was on one of the mainstream media shows referring to members of the legislature, members of the House of Commons, as chocolate soldiers. And it's a derogatory term, it's a slur, but there is some truth to it. Very seldom did I ever see another elected member actually read a piece of legislation and understand what was in it. And I could make an excuse. I read lots of legislation. I read it in a lot of detail. It's very time consuming. It's somewhat boring. I must have a defective gene in me. I actually somewhat enjoy reading legislation. And why I like to read it is to see just how the government is proposing to screw you and screw us.
Right.
But anyway, most elected members are very happy to be giving a one-page summary of the piece of legislation or the bill with the party's summary of whether it's good or whether it's bad, and whether we're going to support it or whether we're not going to support it, and what are the talking points that you're going to say if you are permitted to speak about this bill. If you are going to be permitted to speak about this bill, this is what you're going to say about it, so that we all are singing from that proverbial same song sheet, because there's nothing more important to a political party than for everybody to stay on the same message.
So after everything we've discussed here, do you think that our government is efficient or inefficient? And what should we be striving for in the future? So
this again, we'll make this distinction. In the parliamentary system, they are way too efficient, to the detriment of everyone. And we're paying the price of that efficiency right now. In Ontario, we have over 400,000 provincial laws in Ontario. That's just the provincial laws. There's also your municipal bylaws that are specific to where you live. Then there is also the federal laws and the criminal law. Like, think of this for a minute. Like, that's a lot of laws. And how is anyone to actually remember, or abide by 400,000 laws? If we went back a few millennia ago, there was a time when there was only 10 laws that a person had to abide by. Now, in Ontario, it's 400,000 plus. And each year, this machine cranks out more and more laws. So I say that, and also as you're creating more and more laws, what else does that do with the government? It demands that they levy more and more taxes, right? So um, um, that's there will be one other thing. We should be efficient. If we have a government picking up garbage at the end of your road, or if we have a government plowing the road with snow, that that's the delivery of the service, the delivery of the responsibility uh, should be done cost effectively and efficiently. But even at that, if you want that delivery of service done efficiently and cost effectively, then it should probably be contracted out to the private sector. If we really want it to be effective and efficient. So, it's just be cautious what you actually ask for. If you want limited government, if you want to reduce the scope of government, if you want to constrain their ability to take away your freedoms and liberties, then you don't want an efficient government. You say what you want. You want smaller, limited government, not efficient government. So how are we fixed on questions? We got any questions coming in that we should get around to?
We do. We have a few super chats here. I don't know if you want to go through your website questions first or the super chats.
Well, why don't we do the super chats? If that's you can see them, I can.
I can definitely see them. Okay, so the first one comes in from 18 MVO. They just sent $10, no comment. So thank you so much. This series is very self-funded, so any donation is appreciated. And then we have one from Mika, and she sent $20, and she says, "Hi Randy, hi Lee. No question, just chipping in from my lunch break. Keep up the good fight."
Thank you very much.
And Saving sent in $10 and said, "There is not enough recognition for the work Randy is doing on our behalf. He is literally hanging it out there for all Canadians. Time will show. Here's a beer on me, old friend." That's great. I agree. I 100% agree with this super chat.
That's very generous. Thank you very much. And we will have a beer.
Yeah, maybe at your new your two upcoming events that you have coming up.
Sarnia. I do hope, Sarnia on Thursday evening, and Wallaceburg on Wednesday evening. You can go. I think we put up the links. You can also see all those things on my Substack. I have a free Substack, and it's just substackrandyhillier.com, and you can see all the different events coming up on the uncensored and unfiltered Substack.
And so for the next live stream, if you want to submit a question, up on the screen here is Randy's website where you can submit a question before the next live stream, and I believe that will be on Monday, same bat time, same bat channel. 8 p.m. next Monday. And we'll get into those questions from that website.
Now, can you see those questions, Lee?
I cannot. Let's see here.
Well, here's one from John. He left feedback. It says, our Governor General appears to be a simple figurehead. What are their powers, and how can we encourage them to use them properly? So that's a bigger. I think I might do a episode strictly on the reserve powers of the governor general, and that's the same with each province has a lieutenant governor. Um, they have the ultimate authority, but it is called reserve powers because it's powers that are never expected to be ever used, if that makes sense. So the governor general has the power to dismiss the prime minister. The governor general has the power not to proclaim a piece of legislation. But if they do that, it means that they have lost confidence in the government and a new election must be called. So um, it's very, very seldom. The only example, I know there's been a couple times in our history where the lieutenant governor has um, used those reserve powers. One was back in the 1930s in Alberta, where the Alberta legislature, the premier at the time was Ernest Manning. He was the so-called premier, and he attempted to create a new currency for Alberta, which is unconstitutional. And the lieutenant governor refused to proclaim that bill into law. And sometimes we refer to these as constitutional crises. And the government had to be dissolved and a new election called. Another time where it happened federally is when Mackenzie King asked the Governor General Lord Byng to dissolve Parliament and go have an election. And the Governor General said, no, I'm not going to dissolve Parliament. I will ask the opposition leader if they can have confidence of the House and if they should become prime minister. And I believe at that time it was Sir Arthur Meehan, who was the opposition leader, became prime minister. And that was another use of the reserve powers, which ended up removing the prime minister. So, but there is a lot to that subject. That's just a little tidbit, John. But maybe we'll do a full episode on the reserve powers of our governor generals and lieutenant governors.
All right, I can see the questions now. Okay, so next one says, right now, Canadians are stuck with any politician who is elected until the next election. I believe there is a mechanism in BC politics that can get a referendum or recall or right of recall. Do you think Canada and Ontario will ever have the guts to put into law the right of Canadians to have the right of sorry, this is not, I'm having problems. If you have the guts to put into law the right of Canadians to have the right of recall if a certain percent age of them requested it. Percentage.
Yeah. So this is very common in the United States and in many other jurisdictions around the world, the right of recall. And I actually, I attempted to get recall legislation passed in Ontario as well. We only have one province, however, in all of Canada that has a recall function, and that is a mechanism that allows the voters in a constituency somewhere during the term of the elected representative to petition that representative to step down and to seek a new by-election. So BC has that, but they're the only ones. My colleagues in Ontario certainly didn't like that idea, and they did not vote in favor of that. And it's pretty hard to, to get politicians to pass legislation that would hold them more accountable. Like, that's just a difficult thing to do. Hopefully we'll get there sometime. They did it in BC. They have it in most of the U.S. states. And I think it's an absolutely recall as well as referendum, the ability for voters to pass judgment on bills that have been passed in between elections, I think are critical if we want to have a truly representative and functioning democracy. But we're not there yet.
Hopefully one day.
What?
Hopefully one day.
One day, yeah.
All right. Next question says, "Hi, Randy. Let me start by saying we live in your old riding and we're greatly disturbed by backroom boys kicking you out of the legislature. We lost our elected representative. Still, I find myself supporting Mr. Ford as the other choices are not worth considering. Our system should promote the voting for the local person one believes will represent them best, which party politics has near destroyed."
Well, thank you for those sentiments. And just for clarification, they didn't kick me out of the legislature. They did kick me out of caucus. Well, and even at that, what they had done is they offered me terms to come back into caucus, terms that I found wholly unacceptable. So I chose not to return. Your last sentence really is the essence of the problem that we're facing in our democracy, is that the elected members don't realize who they're supposed to be representing, and most of them are representing party interests rather than their constituents. But it's also, there's a role here of the individual voters as well. Most voters don't even think of who the local representative is, and they vote for the party. They think they're voting for the party leader. So we've seen this all the time. Lee, you've seen this. We've all seen this. You could be walking down the streets of Perth or Niagara or wherever you might be, and you'll say to somebody, "Well, who are you voting for?" And they'll say, "Well, I'm voting for Pierre Poilievre." Well, no, you're not. Not unless you live in Ottawa West, because that's the only place where you can vote for Pierre Poilievre. Or somebody else may say, "Well, I'm going to vote for Justin Trudeau." Well, no, you're not. Not unless you actually live in Westmount in Montreal. You can only, the names on the ballot are your local representatives, and until individual voters recognize that's who you're voting for, not Poilievre, not Trudeau, not Jagmeet or whoever. And you should be evaluating and analyzing who is your best local candidate, and don't just believe that you should only vote for Conservative or NDP or Liberal. In every there's other parties that always have candidates, and there's always independent candidates as well. So don't think about voting for who will win. Think about voting who will represent, because I can tell you, when you vote, if you think you're voting for Poilievre or Trudeau, when they pass legislation afterwards, and if it's going to impact you or affect you, who are you going to call? Are you going to call the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition, or are you going to call your local representative? And who do you think is going to answer the phone? Mm-hmm. And who do you think you're going to actually have some time to talk with? It is your local representative. So an important, that's a topic that we will get into in greater detail on another episode, I'm sure. The importance of of understanding who you're voting for, and it's not the party leader.
So this was a two-part question. So I'm going to read the second half here. It says the examples of proportional representative elections I have seen appear to make party politics stronger, add more politicians and associated expenses, and the situation worse. What is the answer? I have both a no more lockdown sign, no more lockdowns, and your last campaign sign hanging in my garage. Please keep up the fight to bring the corruptions to light within both federal and provincial politics. The next battle is to rid ourselves of Mr. Trudeau. So that was the second part of the first that question that I just asked there.
Well, that's a good question. You know, the first part where it says the examples of proportional representation that he has seen appear to make party politics stronger. That's absolutely true. Anybody who thinks that proportional representation is going to be a savior, just look around the world. Canada is one of the last remaining. Canada, United States, UK are probably the last remaining representative democracies that don't have proportional representation. And do you think things are any better in Italy or Israel, or are they better in France or Germany? What ails our system is not whether it's proportional representation or first past the post. We have far different problems in our system that are not related to whether it's a first past the post or a proportional representation. That's there are, but I'll say there are some advantages, but there's also disadvantages with each of those systems.
Okay. So the next one is, where are our stories? I'd like to know why the CBC and or Heritage Canada has never made or funded any decent historical dramas about our British Canadian history, and what we should be doing about that. The only commercial historical drama I can recall is Black Robe, which was Quebec French centered. And even that was dark, almost a horror story. The US has a myriad commercially successful patriotic historical drama.
Well, that's a really interesting story, and I'm going to say why it was questioned. Because the next episode is indeed about the colorful, rich history of Canada in our rebellions and our pursuit of freedom and our history of gaining independence and freedom from Great Britain, which is unknown to most people in our country. Most people have very little or no understanding that we had the rebellions of 1837 to 39 in Upper and Lower Canada. We had the Northwest rebellions and the Red River rebellions. We had these powerful strikes that resulted in many deaths in the conscription crisis and the Winnipeg General Strike. So, but most Canadians have no knowledge. And so, yeah, where are the stories? It would be nice if one of those firms that received billions of dollars of taxpayers' money every year maybe did some films on our rich and colorful history. But next week, we'll be doing exactly that on our next episode, an examination of the history of freedom in Canada and what we can learn from our history and from the actions of our forefathers when they were faced with an oppressive government.
Yeah, I think me and you have actually talked about that before. The fact that you know, we've been brainwashed to think we're these like we're the peaceful, loving Canadians, but it's like, it's such a misconception. We're actually warriors. We're fighters. We're, you know, we've conquered.
Well, absolutely. Like, this is very, very, you know, we think of that a little bit with the stories of Vimy Ridge and whatnot, but we downplay. So we upplay our warrior heritage in foreign lands, I guess, but we completely underplay and downplay the role of the Canadian warrior at home, and fighting against, you know, these were, you know, in the early days of Canada, it was essentially operated by a couple of chartered monopolies like the Hudson Bay Company and the Northwest Company, and then there was also the French monopoly, and you know, they didn't always treat people very, very well, and Canadians had to take a stand on a number of occasions to uh, uh, gain our freedom from the monarchy and the aristocracy in the old country. So
Yes, and it's been erased on purpose, right? So that we feel like we have nothing. Why bother fighting for anything? Because we're just we're now a post-national state, right? This is they've been deleting our history so that we are very apathetic, and you know, this country is just no identity, sort of thing.
Well, again, that's very true, and we've seen this with the um, with a purposeful denigration of our history. You know, the removal of busts and statues, the renaming of streets,
Dundas.
and like Edgerton Ryerson was a really, really good fella. And he was the father of public education. Now, and I'm sure he'd be rolling in his grave if he saw what was happening to public education today, because he was a strong Christian pastor as well. But yeah, we have been purposely denigrating, diminishing, and destroying our real culture, and making people to believe that we have a culture of, you know, of helplessness and victimhood, rather than victors and warriors, to that did indeed create one of the greatest countries in the world.
We have one last super chat that came in last minute here, from Avery. She sent they sent $5. I can't see the picture. Sorry. So it says, if Bill C-293 gets passed by the Senate, what can the people do about it? It sounds worse than the COVID mandates and EA, Emergencies Act, I guess.
Well, you know, we'll see if there's what amendments come out of the Senate, if any. You know, and there is also this trouble that is happening in Ottawa right now with Justin Trudeau's tenure and his continued leadership of the Liberal Party can play into this. So you know, Bill 293 is a dangerous bill. There's no question about it. And we certainly would not want it to either become law, and nor would we want it to ever be implemented. You know, as bad as what happened during COVID, this would just reinforce all the evil of COVID into a, how should I say, as normal, and there would be no further recourse. So I have no doubt, you know, there will be a day that we will have to honk our horns a lot louder in this country. It worked really well in February of 2022. the people of Canada showed the government of Canada that we had had enough. People threw off the fear. People assembled in the streets and lined the highways and waved their flags and honked their horns. And during that period of time, every province in our country announced that they would end the mask mandates, that they would end the curfews, that they would end the lockdowns. Even the coward in the cottage in Meech Lake in Ottawa announced that he would end the vax passport for international travel. There is just another example which will go down in the history books. Indeed, the rich and colorful history of Canada and Canadians regaining their freedom. So, but we will probably have to do it again. And we might have to honk the horns a little louder next time.
I agree. Big time. And then there's one last super chat that came in for $10 from Rio. No comment, but thank you so much for sending in your super chat and joining us tonight on the very first episode of Canada, a User's Guide and Owner's Manual. Randy, we're at the end of the stream. Is there anything you want to close us out with?
Well, I had a wonderful time. I hope everybody else enjoyed the conversation. I hope they found it informative, educational, and maybe even a little entertaining. Who knows? But I look forward to bringing more stories from the underground of politics to the show, and helping people to regain our freedom and find truly a representative democracy. And I guess until next week, we'll show a little clip of next week's episode. And until then, thank you very much, Lee Stewie, for joining me on this first episode. I've enjoyed my time, and I hope everybody else has as well.
Yeah, keep fighting the good fight, my friend. You're doing a great job.
Thank you. Welcome to Canada, a User's Guide and Owner's Manual. Many people want to fix this broken down machine called government. So join with me every week as we create an owner's manual to help people understand what these parts are, how they're supposed to fit together, and how to troubleshoot, maintain, and fix this broken down machine. In this week's episode of Canada, a User's Guide and Owner's Manual, we ask the question, how did Canadians become free, and how did Canada gain its independence from an oppressive, authoritarian monarchy? Now, many Canadians understand how the Americans did it with the American Revolution, but don't have a great deal of knowledge or understanding of our rich and colorful history and the historical events that led to Canadians becoming free and an independent nation from Great Britain. We'll examine some of these great events, the Upper and Lower Canada Rebellions, the conscription crisis, the Winnipeg General Strike, and many others, to help us understand how our forefathers became free and became an independent nation with a representative democracy. If we want to fix our government today, we can learn a lot from how our ancestors acted in years gone by.